when that little voice just jumps in at you. And then what we would do, we're not going to do that today for the sake of time, but what we typically would do is I would become the data collector, Jackie would become the coach, Cindy would become the coachee. Same conversation, different roles, and then we would switch again so that everyone has the opportunity to practice each role and everyone has the opportunity to be coached. The feedback that we've gotten from coaches is that this has been really powerful for them, not only to practice, but also to be coached. They love to have both sides of that. All of the documents that we use are in the facilitator guides that we'll share with you towards the end of the day. I think they were also put in the chat, so you can grab those anytime. And Jackie, thank you for sharing your notes. That's really helpful. You will notice too with Jackie's notes that she didn't fill out every single section. She only filled out the section that Cindy had asked her to collect data on. This is the same thing when our coaches go in to observe a teacher. They'll only collect data on the goal that the teacher is working on. They won't collect data or evidence around everything going on in the classroom. They only collect data or evidence around that specific goal that the teacher is working on. So it helps keep our coaching very, very focused. We're going to ask you to reflect a little bit on this coaching conversation, and we're going to do it like a waterfall. So what are your biggest takeaways from this model of coaching? And from what you saw Cindy and Jackie and I do, what are your biggest takeaways? Type it in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. We'll give you about 1 minute to get your thoughts into the chat, but don't hit enter. Just let it sit there for a minute. Sometimes a minute feels really long. All right, on the count of 3, you're going to hit enter and you'll see all of your responses slide through the chat like a waterfall. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Hit that enter button. I love this. And now I'll give you about 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes, to go through and read the thoughts of your colleagues and the people here. And feel free to respond to someone if you have a comment that you'd like to say back. So go ahead and read through the thoughts and reflections, and then we'll move on. Yeah, a lot of you said that it reminds you of cognitive coaching, and that's true. We all have had some cognitive coaching training and find it to be very powerful. And so, and the more you use it, the more natural it becomes and the less like cognitive coachy it sounds. It just sounds supportive. And so the existing state, desired state form that Cindy was using as her guide have coaching questions scripted right in there. So if you're a new coach and you don't know what to say, it's okay to have that out in front of you and tell the teacher, we're going to use this form to help guide our conversation. I'm going to practice some questions from here. And it's okay to do that to help you grow your practice and to help keep your coaching conversation focused. A couple of you also commented on how short and concise these conversations are. You really need 10 minutes. If a teacher is really, really struggling, it's okay to jump in and say, hey, would you like a couple of ideas? And they'll say, oh my gosh, yes, please. So you give them 2 or 3 ideas and say, which one sounds best to you? And they'll pick one and then you move on. It's okay to keep that conversation moving and not sit dead in the water forever, because then everybody ends up frustrated. The last piece, thank you again for sharing your thinking. It's so fun to see. The last little piece, oh yes, thank you, Amy. A lot of you still have your cameras off and we'd love to see your faces again. So you can turn your cameras back on. And the last piece of the onboarding coaches session, we've done our coaching foundations. Coaches have done some practice. So then we just invite them into the commitment. We explain the slick cycle of the whole group learning, the coaching in between, the whole group learning, and the coaching in between. And we tell our coaches, we expect you to engage in this coaching cycle with your teacher or with your teachers. We're here to support you. We also ask our coaches to walk alongside and walk with the science consultant, especially if the coach is a literacy coach. It's real easy to go into science and then have literacy take over. We can't have that happen, which is why this is a collaboration, and our science counterparts are so important. So when you do your planning conversation, invite the science consultant in. Or if the science consultant can't make it, share your notes with your science counterpart. Have that conversation after, so that we can continue to keep the literacy and the science embedded and integrated together. We also ask coaches to use coaching forms to document their coaching. And then their homework, they're always sent off with to read through the SLIT guidebook, which we'll share with you at the end of the day, and start thinking about focus areas, and also to communicate with administration about these coaching cycles and what that might look like. And that's our onboarding coaching session. And again, this one is held just with the coaches, and it really starts to set the foundation and set the tone for the rest of the work.
Can I ask a question? I feel like you've addressed this, but I'm still confused. Are your coaches all literacy coaches? Are they all science coaches, or is there a mix?
We take whatever coach we can get.
Okay.
In some of our districts, in a lot of our districts, they're literacy coaches, either at the ISD level or at the district or building level. We do have some of our districts are shifting away from literacy coaches into instructional coaches. So those are the most common, is either a literacy coach or an instructional coach. We had one district that had a science coach, but that's very, very rare. And that's why we really stress having a science counterpart in this project, either an ISD consultant, a science leader, someone who's been trained and knows what good science instruction looks like. Oh, and we have a social studies coach this year too. Yeah, good question. Thanks for asking.
Add right. That it's not we don't want it to be a barrier for you if you don't have access to a science individual. That will be something we address later. We've got your list of folks that support you around the state, many of which are here. And then if you need support, then we want you to reach out and figure out how we can help you as well. So we don't want that to be a barrier. All right, y'all ready to move into some science, some fun? We're going into, okay. So that is our first, so that our onboarding coaching session is the first one that as a facilitator that you would work with your coaches on. And then we have a series of 3 learning together sessions that are combined with your coaches and your teachers. The first session is really science forward, and the second session is literacy forward, and then the third session is a celebration. And so we want to make sure, because many of our elementary folks have not had a lot of science training in the vision of the new science standards, and so we want to give them an experiential activity to engage them in that. And so if you were an early literacy coach and you joined us in May, that was your experiential moment. And we're going to have another one today online. So you'll see some connections to that. And if you're a science friend of ours, then this is going to feel very comfortable in your space right now. So we're going to do an elementary lesson that's actually intended for adult learners, although it is technically linked to 3rd grade standards if you really need to know this. But we're going to ask you to actually think about walking into, hold on, we'll get you started first and then I'll let you know what we're doing. So our goals for this session, for the Learning Together session that was onboarding coaches, this is for our Learning Together session, our next segment, I guess, is we're going to further our understanding for the vision of science education right now in our new Michigan. They're not new anymore. They're like 9 years old, but it still feels like I need to say new. science standards. We're going to ask you to step into a learner hat mode. You can be an adult learner. You do not need to turn into a first or second or third grader, but you can stay as an adult learner for the science experience. And then we're going to have, then we're going to step back into teacher hat was what we call it in science, but we'll connect, we'll go back into adult learner mode or adult mode as thinking about linking our early literacy practices and our science engineering practices and see how they overlap. This is how the 6 of us kind of figured out what areas we thought was the right focus for the work. And then at the end of this particular Learning Together session, which is a 2-hour block, we have the group, we have each of our districts, our coaches and our teachers set a broad goal that they might want to work on. And those broad goals will be vocabulary, text sets, academic productive talk, or writing. So that's what our model uses. You can certainly be more creative than that. We did have somebody walk into the world of phonics last year. So you can be, we like to move into the strengths of the teachers and coaches from there. Okay. So what we're going to do right now, and these are some of our amazing classrooms with full of amazing students that were a part of this work, is we're going to first step into that science lesson. And we're going to look at the intersection between the SEPs and EIPs, and then we'll do the broad goal piece. We're going to spend most of our time in that science learner hat, just to make sure that we're grounded in that piece. Okay. We do find when we do these activities with teachers, just like you guys, I mean, you guys know you're very, you're already veteran facilitators, I'm sure, that a connector is really important. So that is built into the facilitator guide, and we use the memory around science education as a young person. We're not going to do that right now because we've got a time commitment to attend to, but we do think those connectors are really important because we use a hybrid model. So teachers are in different counties, and teachers and coaches are in different counties, and we're online with them, but then we're in person with our districts. So it's a really unique kind of situation. We're allowing them to chat with one another. Okay, so that brings us to the science learning. So what I'm going to have you do is if someone can throw the Jamboard, the first Jamboard in the chat, it looks like this. And we're going to put you into what we call learner hat. So again, adult learner. Right now, you're going to need to be able to manipulate that Jamboard. So you'll want to get in that a minute. As you do that, we're going to experience a phenomenon. And I'm going to start you with a lima bean and a ladybug. So let's start with the lima bean. I am going to actually stop sharing because I don't know if I made sure that the video is not that important, but I am going to optimize everything here. There we go, just to make sure. And all right, let's get started with the lima bean to start. Speed it up just a little bit here. Right. Thinking a little bit about what you noticed and what you might wonder, we're also going to move over and watch a similar situation with a ladybug. So here we go. You guys didn't know this was rated PG, did you? Okay. All right. So we're gonna hop over to the Jamboard. And what I'd like you to do for a minute is on slide 2, there is a noticing and wondering chart. So if you'll take some of the sticky notes and throw them in, what did you notice and what did you wonder? And I've placed 2 examples in there. I noticed that the ladybug life takes a lot of steps. And I've also wonder if plants can have babies. So those are my 2. So if you'll just take a couple minutes and add, if you've got a noticing or a wondering that you're curious about, add those to the Jamboard. very fun questions, wondering, see a couple people are curious about how much time passes. And seeing some patterns that both the lima bean and the ladybug have some change in movement. Parts seem to come and go. Where the spots were too. I'm like, they must have, like, because they do have spots when I vacuum them in my vacuum cleaner. That's terrible to say. Or get rid of them in my house or put them outside. And nymph ladybugs are creepy, right? They are. But they eat things about the same size as themselves. That's like a huge wondering of mine too. Like, how do you actually eat something almost the same size as yourself? It's bizarre. Okay. And I wonder why the sprout stem pushes to the surface of the soil before it leaves. That's interesting too. All right. So thank you guys for your noticings and wondering. There's lots here. We're going to think a little bit about, as you kind of finish up a little bit here, what I'm really curious about today and where I think we need to dig in a little bit deeper is if I head to the next slide, I really want to think about how does a living thing make a new living thing? And so we're going to really focus on that question a minute as learners. So how does a living thing make a new living thing? We saw the lima bean and we saw the ladybug. So let's think about all living things and see if we can figure out if there's some sort of pattern involved. So the first activity we're going to do is we're going to read some images on the Jamboard together. So I'm going to have you take just a minute, and if you've got a paper and pencil and you would like to jot some things down, you may, if you do not have to. But let's take a look at some of the images right now. So let's see. We're going to observe some diagrams. We're going to do one of a frog and a butterfly and a plant. And we're going to take a look at, and the questions we're looking at is, whoops, sorry, I moved that. What pattern or patterns do you notice? How these living things make new living things? What do they have in common and what might be different? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at for a minute. Let's take a peek. All right, here's your frog. Take a look at that for a minute here. Do you notice there's a really big word on that slide called metamorphosis? I'm not really sure if I know what that means, but it does look like something is different between the egg and the tadpole, if that's the line. Let's take a look at the butterfly. Okay. I might think about the fact that I saw they both have eggs in common. That's interesting. Okay. Let's take a look at the plant here. I don't see eggs in here. I might know something or think something, but I don't see them here. What we're going to do is we're going to move you into small group breakouts. And I've positioned you where there's at least one science person in the literacy groups. And so we're going to ask you to create what in science we call a model, which is a visual representation that explains what these organisms have in common to answer this, this question. How does a living thing make a new living thing? So in your model, you should address maybe those patterns, things they have in common, and put together some sort of model that explains that. You can use pictures, words, texts. You can add symbols in there if you'd like. My science folks, we're going to have you make sure the groups are attending to what are those parts of the system that you're drawing in or of the model that are attended to. How do those parts interact and why do they interact that way, if that seems appropriate in that model? We're not putting the science people in charge, but they've probably developed models before, so that's going to be your expertise lean in kind of thing if needed. All right. So you can see right here that they are labeled by group. So in your breakout, make sure you know if your breakout 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and each breakout has its own slide. Any questions as to what you will be doing? You'll be doing a general model on what those all have in common and how you might represent that in your slide. Any questions? Here's the really tricky, sticky part. Due to time, I'm only giving you about 10 minutes, which means whoever your Jamboard expert is needs to be on it with the drawing or the picture stuff. So if make sure that you are getting stuff down the best you can for that during that time. Okay. All right, I'm going to have you hop into breakouts and there you go. Enjoy 10 minutes. So what I've done is just taken it and put it together in a really general model of the patterns I saw as you guys were doing that for the sake of time. But what I did was it looks like on 13, you've got that beginning, which you all said seemed to be smaller, and then moved into some sort of middle where changes were happening. Pretty significant changes were happening and things were getting what seemed to be larger. And then we had the grown-up stage that was similar in everybody's, and that seemed to continue to cycle. And then during each stage of the parts, each of the parts did change. Some are new parts and some parts go away. Those seem to be what everyone have in common. I did notice some pretty big words, germination, species, reproduction. So we were able to pull out some of our adult words. When students start pulling out those adult words, we want to kind of set them aside because you don't always know if every student in your room knows what they are. And so once we get to the part where we're using them and need them, then we might really define them and put them into our class vocabulary. So it's just a little bit different than how a lot of times we approach literacy, right? We do that for fluency and for the ability to read. And so we might pre-do some word vocabularies, words ahead of time when we read. But in science, we might save some of those tier 3 vocab words for when we encounter them, and so that we can have a common understanding of them, right, Andrea? Yep, words we earn in science. And there is some competing, some of our folks will say we don't want to withhold vocabulary from kids. So we still honor that they use it. We just might need to come to a common understanding of what those terms mean. So back to Learner Hat, I noticed that some of you had something in there but not everybody. There was one difference that I noticed in most of your models. So back in Learner Hat, how does one living thing make a new living thing? We're going to call that a life cycle, right? So now this is one of our words that we earn. We're going to say this is a life cycle. All living things go through some version of a life cycle. And it's basically the process that you guys mapped out. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a grown-up part. There's changes during the entire time. There's probably a lot of words that we could use to describe it. So we're going to call those things life cycles. So we can look at all kinds of life cycles from any living organism that we can come across, or between a mushroom and a giant oak tree. Okay. Very typically, I would want to throw a little bit of a problem of practice in there too. So I'm going to do that really quickly, but I wonder why the world isn't covered with butterflies and frogs. When I go outside, I don't usually go outside and step on butterflies or step on frogs. I did run over a frog this year with my car in my garage, but that made me sad. That doesn't usually happen. That's like one in the last 15 years I've lived at this house. So why is it when I go outside, I don't step on all these butterflies and step on all these frogs? And if we had a little more time, we'd have you talk with a partner about this or stop and chat with some think time. But some of you already have this idea in your models and some of you don't. So this is an opportunity where I would dig in a little bit further, and we're going to use a read aloud. And this is really a rock and read, not a full read aloud, because we know read alouds in the literacy essentials require us to stop and have conversations with kids and do some talk moves, right? So this is what I would really call a rock and read instead of a read aloud. But we're going to use this as text to forward our understanding of what maybe some of the models have thought about, but not all of them. So let's think that through a little bit. So we're going to hop in and we're going to have our friend read us a book. So I'm going to share screen, and we're going to collect a little information to make sure that we can, all of us, have the same understanding that we might need to add something to our model.
Tadpole's Promise by Gian Willis and Tony Ross. I've got Felix with me today. Have you got your special friend with you? Let's have a look at our story. Where the willow meets the water, a tadpole met a caterpillar. They gazed into each other's tiny eyes and fell in love. She was his beautiful rainbow, and he was her shiny black pearl. I love everything about you, said the tadpole. And I love everything about you, said the caterpillar. Promise you'll never change. I promise, he said. But as sure as the weather changes, the tadpole could not keep his promise. Next time they met, he had grown 2 legs. You've broken your promise, said the caterpillar. Forgive me, begged the tadpole. I couldn't help it. I don't want these legs. All I want is my beautiful rainbow. And all I want is my shiny black pearl. Promise me you'll never change, said the caterpillar. I promise, he said. But as sure as the seasons change, the next time they met, he had grown arms. That's twice you've broken your promise, cried the caterpillar. Forgive me, begged the tadpole. I could not help it. I do not want these arms. All I want is my beautiful rainbow. And all I want is my shiny black pearl. I will give you one last chance, said the caterpillar. But as surely as the world changes, the tadpole could not keep his promise. The next time they'd met, he had no tail. You have broken your promise 3 times, and now you've broken my heart, said the caterpillar. But you are my beautiful rainbow, said the tadpole. Yes, but you are not my shiny black pearl. Goodbye. And she crawled up the willow branch and cried herself to sleep. One warm moonlit night, she woke up. The sky had changed, the trees had changed, everything had changed except for her love for the tadpole. Even though he'd broken his promise, she decided to forgive him. She dried her wings and fluttered down to look for him. Where the willow meets the water, a frog was sitting on a lily pad. Excuse me, she said. Have you seen my shiny black? But faster than she could say pearl, the frog leapt up and swallowed her in one great gulp.
I hope you aren't too traumatized. Some of you have known me for a while. You've seen this shtick before, but yeah, pretty awful. So this is the moment where we would have to go back to our models and ensure that something is there, which is what everybody death, right? And in the 3rd grade standards, that is part of the life cycle that we add death to it. So it is birth. I think there's 4 steps: birth, reproduction, growth, and death. And so that was where we make sure that our model contains that piece too. So models tend to be revised or added to along the way. So that kind of concludes what we do in science to kind of give our teachers and coaches a feel for what the science standards might look and feel. Jennifer, do you have a question?
Do. And I feel like I'm having a Sheldon moment. Like I'm fixated on that reproduction is not represented in any of those models either. And they're all the models are sexual reproduction. The fern is ippy because that can be either or. And thinking down the road, where are we in concern for seeding or feeding misconceptions that we have to undo later?
Sure, I appreciate that question a lot. Thank you for asking it. So because this was a lesson that we created based off the third grade standards, they do not, that's the that's the boundary for third grade. They don't deal with reproduction until later. My guess is because they don't do reproduction until fifth grade. And so it's not appropriate at that point. And so this was based off of that. It's not saying that it doesn't happen. It's definitely seeing the adult who, needs to lay eggs, or the seed is, seeds will be created from the plant. But that's the extent of where they go in third grade. So it's just the boundary of the particular standard at that point. They're very careful with, and in the new in the science standards to keep things developmentally appropriate and aligned to other content areas. So your math and your common core, your common core math, your common core literacy, and also looks like health is appropriate at the appropriate time.
Yeah. So, but like the leading question about how do they reproduce, I guess I would wonder if that's something that we could like change maybe that language a little bit on how do they live and grow and change, so that we're not seeding that vocabulary that later needs to have more nuance and more sophistication, where you're, with the parentage piece. So
I appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. That's definitely something to consider. So thank you for that. Okay. We have one quick thing. Just I want to show you. Okay. So I'm going to have you do this slide. If you'll go to slide 17, and I'd like you to think about, especially literacy folks, how might this be a little different than, how do we tend to approach science a little bit differently than we do literacy? Are there any things that we need to call out or take note of? Because there is a difference in pedagogy. So just think a minute about your experience and what you know about literacy, and go ahead and throw a couple things on that slide for me. What are those differences on how we might approach science versus how we might approach literacy during instruction? Anything we need to call out, take note on? Give you just about a minute or two here. Some really interesting comments, and we spent our group of 6 with half literacy coaches and half science consultants. We spent a lot of time on this. So when we developed our SLIC model, we really dug deeply into what science looks and sounds like and what literacy looks and sounds like. And a lot of what you have on here is very similar to the conversations that we spent a long time talking about. Christi and I still have these conversations about language development and how that works between the two. It's really an interesting piece. So I appreciate you lifting those things, but I think the one that is standing out most to me is there's a lot of very explicit instruction during literacy time, especially during that phonics stages in that K-3 world. And so that's a very different situation than these more inquiry constructivist type pedagogies that we use in science and math these days. And so it's okay that that's happening, that you have different structures during different content times. But it is something we like to call out so that teachers understand that there's just sort of flipping things a little bit on their head. And we hope it gives teachers confidence in thinking you don't have to know it all. You can learn along with the kids. Yes, content is helpful. Don't get me wrong, but it's okay to learn along with, because you're being curious and asking questions. So, okay. So thank you for your thinking on that. If you continue on that slide deck, you will see a couple extra slides on what we consider and extrapolate from our experience. We're going to just leave those in there. Those are definitely there for your facilitation, but I want to take you through the next steps in this learning together session. So you've just done the science experience, which is really the largest part of this particular learning together session. And then what we do, we're not going to actually do this for the sake of time, but what we do is we have, and there's a couple facilitator notes on here. You will have your folks make sure that you're gonna have folks kind of choose an area of focus just for this activity. They don't have to choose a goal yet, but they can. It's kind of up to you. They take a look, and this is the next Jamboard. I don't know if that got into the chat yet or not. The next Jamboard for this particular session is they take a look at academic discourse, text sets, writing, and we don't have a vocabulary slide, but that'll be in there. We can put that in there. Whatever they're going to use, whatever they think, we want to take a look at each of these 4 pieces and have them take a look at the science and engineering practices, which are things like asking questions, developing models, analyzing data, constructing explanations, and see how they overlap with the literacy essentials. And we give them specific essentials to really dig into. And then we give them a sheet that Kari created on the science and engineering practices. It's a little bit easier to read than the one from the appendix. Same language though. And we do the same thing for text sets, and we do the same thing for writing and vocabulary. However, we usually split them up so that each group is doing one, split it up in thirds and sort of jigsaw it if we have a lot of people. If you don't have a lot of people and you're working with a really small group, you can choose to only dig into the one that you might be setting a goal on. But that's all in the facilitation guides that you'll be getting today. And then it's a pretty easy lift to kind of have them see both of them together. With that said, the last piece in this particular learning together session is broad goal setting. Sometimes this happens during the coaches section, and sometimes it happens during this particular learning together session time. Sometimes on the coaching onboarding, the coaches decide, no, I really want my whole team to work on academic productive talk. And then they kind of talk to the teachers about how they're going to reboot that within their building. Other times we have the teachers and coach sit together and decide which ones they think that they would like to do. And again, this is broad goal. So do you want to work on text sets, writing, academic productive talk, or vocabulary? And you just sort of select one. From there will be more time. You will then build in some activity. There'll be time for the coaches to meet with the teachers during the school day, during passing, set up, lunch or prep or before, after school, to get into a more specific goal around those broad goals. Christi, is there anything I should add to that piece?
No, usually the broad goal is like this big focus area. So we want to focus on writing, academic productive talk. And it's always aligned with whatever the school improvement goal is or the district improvement goals, so that we're not competing. Somebody had asked earlier about competing initiatives. Yes. The broad goal is always set within the context of the school or district goal.
Yeah, thank you.
That those are aligned.
Thank you for reminding me of that. A quick example of that is last year in Lowell, Kendra, the early lit coach there, checked with the building that we were working in, and their goal was actually phonics instruction. And so we actually decided to do, and that we leaned into Kendra because she was OG trained. And so we leaned into her and we did phonics we did this, we pulled out like phonemes. Am I doing that right, Christi? Or am I doing that right, Cindy? Okay, we like phonetically like words from the science piece, and they actually taught those during phonics instruction time, and then flipped it so that they could do it, and then they would take what they learned in phonics and apply it to their writing during science time. So their focus was writing. So that's just an example of how it aligns to the school or district goals. I'll give you an example. Okay, so that takes us to the end of Learning Together session 1. I wondered if you might have one word or phrase that you might add to the chat after Learning Together session 1 that you might throw in for us a minute. And then while you do that, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask them. One word or phrase in the chat.
I do have a question. We have some elementary schools that have new literacy programs that are where like the content of the literacy program is science based. And so does anybody have experience with schools who kind of feel like they're doing science because there is science built into their literacy program? And what are some helpful tools to combat that?
So I can think of some of those programs off the top of my head already. I don't know that I have anything to combat them other than I would say that is equally, this is the science person in me. So literacy folks, I'd love to hear what you think too, because we did a lot of learning along the way with this too. And I learned a ton about literacy, and our literacy folks learned a ton about science, and it created this really nice blend of understanding that yes, you're reading about science and you're reading about social studies embedded into the literacy program. And we think that's fantastic. But unless those students are engaged in science and engineering practices around asking questions or constructing explanations or analyzing data and doing those hands-on components that allow them to experience that, then they're not really attending to science. And it doesn't always go well when you have that conversation, but that's the reality. It's also become an equity issue, right? Like if you aren't allowing students to put their hands on things and make sense of things, then you're not giving them the tools that have been passed down from scientists and engineers through the course of many generations, right? And we have all these STEM careers that have no humans in them that we are outsourcing. And I mean, so it's definitely a trickle effect. I don't know, Lene, if you want to talk about that conversation with bookworms, I don't know if that's helpful. I know I've listened to that before too. Or where she went.
Yeah, I have a couple who use bookworms, and so they say, they're aligned. We teach science. And so we've just walked through and looked at some of the topics, and we've kind of sorted out where things are in other grade levels. And then in looking at their topic bundles for the texts that truly do align or support what they're kind of tasked with in science, we dig a little bit deeper. And so I've kind of leaned into some of those specifically that are in connection with their actual grade level science. And then I try to list too that, the standards are kind of the floor, not the ceiling. So while we want to be attentive to those assessment boundaries and not necessarily assess them going too far, that's not to say that we can't expose them and use all those other texts, and that's great, build up for other grade levels, but really focusing in to make sure that we are attending to kind of the tasks of their science standards. And then kind of going from there, we start the shift of shifting from just learning about to figuring out and thinking through some of those pieces where we can't just sit in the text, but we need to kind of do some investigations in the other parts of those practices as well.
Some really fantastic feedback. Thank you, Lene. I appreciate that in the chat as well. It is really helpful to have a literacy person pushing on it as well. Nell Duke's work, she's been screaming. Tanya Wright has been screaming. Both of them have been screaming. I mean, they're standing on large boxes going, somebody please listen to me, and saying, we are literacy people and we need science education being taught in schools every day. That is something that Tanya's writing K-5 science curricular resources, right? Like that's a thing. And she's a literacy person. So we've got to, it's it's real, Sarah, like, right. It's like something that we battle daily, but it's not what's okay for kids in elementary buildings these days. But it's really hard to get that time and dedicate that time for sure.
And I think as a literacy person, like lifelong literacy person, I was one of those teachers that thought if we're reading an informational text about science, then we have science covered and I can check it off the list. And through conversations with science colleagues and kind of watching the joy that happens in real science, my thinking started to change and say, oh my gosh, we need this. And I've always worked with students in poverty, and they have so many life experiences that get discounted in a literacy setting. Their life experiences are so supported and enlarged and acknowledged when science is done right and done well. And so when Wendi talked about equity, that's a piece that if I was still teaching in the district that I taught in prior to becoming a coach, taking what I know now, that's something that I would have brought to leadership to say, look at our population, look at everything that's discounted in the literacy setting. Yes, we're trying to get more diverse books, but that doesn't allow them to have voice in their own experiences. But look at these science practices they do. And the other thing too is when Wendi helped me dig into the science and engineering practices, it becomes crystal clear that science is not done during literacy time. And so that science and engineering, and the other thing too, I think, is that schools who don't do science prioritize literacy. They also prioritize math, and they know the standards for mathematical practice. And so if we can bring in the science and engineering practices and say, where are these things happening in our literacy block? And to start to have that conversation. If we're doing the math practices and we're doing the literacy practices, we also need to be doing the science practices. Where do these show up in our literacy block? And what might our students be missing without that science piece? So that's a great third point to bring in, to just have the conversation without kicking people out the door.
Okay, so it's such a hard question. I wish if I had a magic diet pill, we'd all be very wealthy, or I would anyway, because I would distribute it and make the money. But no, I'm just kidding. It's just, we wish we had the little silver special thing that made this all work, but unfortunately, that is a good question that we have to attend to. Okay, it is 11 o'clock, and you've been sitting for a very patient amount of time. I believe we have a 15-minute, is that what it is? 15-minute break, 10-minute break, I'm sorry. And then we'll come back, and then we do have a 45-minute lunch. So it's very short after the break, but you've been here too long. So put your cameras off for 10 minutes. We'll see you at 11. We'll give you until 11:12.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming back from break. We've shared on the screen Wendi's initial activity, and Jackie mapped it out where we're all from. So you can see visually, it's quite a diverse group of people here today, which is really exciting. And this is a really cool tool if we can get it to share. Thank you, Jackie, for putting that on the screen and putting that together for us. Okay, we are going to transition into the Learning Together session 2. And just quickly, the goals for that session. We are going to spend a little bit of time giving participants, coaches, and teachers a chance to reflect on their experience so far. At this point of the second session, they've likely had either a co-planning coaching opportunity, or some may have gotten actually into a coaching cycle, depends on where they are in their science unit. We have found a mix, because a lot of times elementary science teachers might teach science for a little while and then they'll flip to social studies. So it kind of depends on what their instructional cycle looks like. We'll also dig into the 4 literacy areas a little bit more deeply. And then we'll spend the last part of the time together digging into the curricular resource that the district is using, and specifically the unit, to try to identify places where those literacy focus areas might naturally support the content learning. Okay, and then the actual activities. So the first part is what we're just calling a grounding mindset. So all of the learning together sessions, as Wendy mentioned before, have some kind of a connector. And then the reflection tool we used is a protocol called Compass Points, and we're going to have you engage in that today. And then the second part of it, again, is using some articles from NSTA, or the National Science Teachers Association, which we've gotten permission to use around each of those 4 areas. So text sets, academic productive talk, writing, and vocabulary. And we'll use those articles to dig in and launch the conversation among the coaches and teachers. So it's another learning opportunity. And then the last part of it, again, is that sequencing part. And this really is an important critical step. So I would encourage you not to skip it. It's been pretty powerful with the teachers. And we'll look at that, what that looks like here shortly. So the connector, this isn't the one that we typically use, but we thought we'd try it. We're going to ask you to take a moment and read through these 4 quotes, all from 4 different resources or sources, and maybe just come up with a theme or a common phrase or thread that you might stand out to you or resonates with you. And then we'll ask you when you're ready to go ahead and put that in the chat. So we'll give you a couple minutes to read through those and share them in the chat. Some great themes coming out here. See a couple around the contradicting everything we know about the importance of knowledge and vocabulary and text comprehension. Some comments about vocabulary development. I like the one from Jeff, learning to read and reading to learn might not be as mutually exclusive. And teaching literacy helps students to be scientists. How powerful is that? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I'm going to pass it off momentarily to Cindy, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the literacy areas.
I just want to, again, reiterate what Amy was saying. Those shifts in thinking are so important when we start to do this work. And when we start to do the compass points, one of the big purposes that we do this activity is to get an opportunity to debrief with the team. Because a lot of times we kind of step away and then let the locals do the work as far as the local literacy coach and the teacher. We come back and we're reconnecting. So just kind of, again, thinking about these themes that Amy was talking about, we start to discover them with the teams that we're working with too. So this next activity, the compass points, is really a chance for us to debrief as a team and figure out where, if there's any barriers, what their needs are, what they're really excited about, so we can build off those strengths. And what questions they still might have. And again, this is a really nice, beautiful component where we have that science consultant side by side with the literacy person. So whichever area they have more wonderings or questions about, they have an expert in the space to really help them explore and push their thinking. We've shifted the questions for today just to try to meet the needs of you as participants. The questions that we lean into are very similar, but again, it really stems more from the work that we left them with after the first Learning Together session. And it gives us a chance to just reconnect and see how things are going. Right now, we're going to give you an opportunity to connect with somebody who's positioned like you. So science folks will be with science folks and literacy people will be with literacy people. And we're going to invite you to fill out or go through this compass point activity. And I believe we have it in I think it's in a PowerPoint. I'm trying to remember, a Google slide. I believe it is. And you just pick one of the slides and you fill in whatever your conversation is, the natural teaching point. We invite you to go through all 4, but you can, if you want to live and lean into 1 or 2, that's okay too. Wherever the natural conversation goes is right where we want you to be. So what else do you need to know specifically about this SLIC piece or find out about for this work? What suggestions might come to mind as a next step? What's going well around science and literacy, and what excites you about this work? And what might be a barrier or a growth opportunity? I know that was kind of already lifted. So how do we start to address that or start to think about how we might come around it? I think Wendi has a breakout room set to ready to go, but before we launch you, are there any questions, or what questions might you have around the task?
Okay. Before I send you to breakout, just so you kind of know where you are in like our pathway and our timeline, I did place that in the chat. They've had learning together session 1. They've set a goal. The coach and the teachers have set a goal. There may or may not be working on some of that goal in their classroom through a coaching cycle. And that's okay either way. Some get that first we would love for them to get a first coaching cycle in between the first 2, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So just kind of get an idea of where it is. Okay, I'm gonna open those rooms. There's 15 minutes on the clock. And Jennifer, I put you with science. If you prefer to be with literacy, I can move you. So just come on back, let me know, and you can choose. Here we go.
Just to nudge, I can assure you the team, the people here would love to hear what you discussed, either what excites you or what your wonderings are. It really helps to push our thinking too, because we all come from different spaces. As we look at that map, we all have different challenges, but there are some similarities and commonalities that we have as well. 2 more would be great.
Got Leah, Cindy.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Leah. Like I said, your thinking is so valued, and it's so rare that we get a chance to hear from so many different people. So we would love to have you open up and share what your team discussed. 1 more.
A possibility might be for the facilitators to ask a clarifying question of a group or 2, because we were having some conversation and we weren't sure. I don't know, it might be an option if somebody's not willing to share.
I don't mind sharing from group 2. I just don't know if somebody already volunteered from that group.
That's okay. We can still have 2 people from the same group. Thank you, Stephanie. You'll be the 3rd one. So Sarah, we're going to have you go first if that's okay.
Sure. So I don't know that we got to all of the compass points, but I can share the ones that we did. In terms of needs for North, we talked about there is a need for helping districts to understand the need for this work and being willing to overcome some of the obstacles that are in the way of making this work a reality. Some things we were excited about is the fact that literacy coaches seem to be really into and excited for anything they can do to assist teachers in the classroom. So this would just be another way that they could do that. And then for suggestions, we thought it would be helpful to kind of lean into the need for equity and kind of framing the conversation around how this is equitable, that we're honoring students' life experience and giving all students an opportunity to build these really necessary skills. And then also talked a little bit about how the community seems to really value science instruction and education. And so maybe using that as a platform to present to school leaders that, you know, this is not just something that I want as a consultant or that, you know, a handful of people want. This is something that is wanted and needed by the entire community as a whole. And then also talked about how a lot of the science practices that kids build while learning science really flow nicely into career readiness and college readiness.
So many great points. Such a rich conversation. I'm leaning really into the equity piece because that was, you know, just something that's heavy on our minds and thoughts. So thank you so much, Sarah. Number 2, Leah, would you mind sharing?
Sure. Our group had an awesome conversation. We talked a lot about teacher efficacy and just making sure that we are aware that teachers might not see themselves in that lens as being really excited about science and just that our students are watching us and they want to see that we love what we're doing. And that makes a difference. So as coaches, we talked about providing different opportunities for our teachers to really engage in science themselves, have lots of examples. We talked about possibly doing make and takes, where kind of like that Jamboard activity you guys did with us, we could kind of recreate and do with teachers as well. So they have, you know, something to take back the next day to their classroom. We talked about kind of like mini activities that are not too overwhelming, that they can just quickly take back. Mini inquiries, I think was the term we used.
I love that. I love the idea of thinking about however we support the teachers. It's something that they can use too. And I really appreciate you lifting that teacher efficacy, because full transparency, I was one of those teachers that did not like to teach science for a plethora of reasons. I felt like I didn't know enough. I felt like I wasn't good enough at it. I had a hard time managing it. I wasn't really sure how to get live in a messy world for an hour of my day and then bring it back down to the structure that I felt like I needed for the other content areas. So I think with Amy's help, I completely shifted my thinking, and that science lens is just completely different than what a lot of elementary teachers, especially that are in the lane of literacies, have some challenges with. So I appreciate you lifting that. And I know, just like I said, that partnership has been huge for me personally. We had one more share out, Stephanie, I think it was, for the third one.
Hey. All right, so I'm sharing from group 2 slide, and we chatted a lot of just having that district support. So ensuring that science is being emphasized from the top down. So in the specific district that I'm in, they kind of like discarded it and really wanted us to emphasize math and reading. So really bringing back that building knowledge piece with the science. And one of the things that we were wondering about, which also kind of turned into a need, is experiencing what a vocabulary lesson would look like from a science lens. We all have that access, or the literacy coaches are aware of Anita Archer's like lessons that she has, and how we can just watch that online, and the teachers can get a good understanding of what explicit vocabulary instruction is. And it would be interesting to just compare and contrast for us as coaches, and even for the teachers, to see how vocabulary instruction would look differently through like that inquiry-based learning.
Stephanie, you bring up such a good point. We've had so many discussions around vocabulary in particular, and I know when we originally shared our slideshow, vocabulary wasn't on there because we felt like it was embedded between the other three, but you're exactly right. There is a different lens on what a vocabulary instruction looks like in science and literacy, for sure. Thank you guys for sharing. Like I said, the rich conversations help us all grow, and they're all places and spaces that we've struggled with and had challenges around. I'm going to invite us to go on to the next part of what this learning together session would be, which is where we do a little bit of learning around literacy. We have put together a packet, like she said before, that we have as a guidebook that has all 4 of these articles in it. And we have gotten permission to use these articles for specifically this work. And you are absolutely allowed to use these articles as well, as long as they stay in the same formatting that they are in currently. We're going to invite you to use a protocol called the Golden Line to explore one of these articles. And if you were with us at the August Institute, you can choose a different article, or you can use the same one if you want to look at it again. Again, they're focused around 4 of the vocabulary, or 4 of the literacy essential areas that we picked to really study and try to find connections with science. So we have an article on text texts, academic productive talk, writing, and vocabulary. And the Golden Line protocol is basically where you read the article and you select a line from the text that either raises a question for you, confirms something that you already know. It could make you say, I remember that, or I'm curious around that. It could have a conflict with your belief. It might make you reconsider something, like an assumption you had before, making you do some deeper thinking or challenging yourself. Or you could also show constraint around the problem or the topic. And because we don't have a hard copy for you, I'm just going to invite you to use a sticky note And I want you to choose 2 different golden lines from whichever article you read. Why 2? If someone takes yours for the first time, you have a second backup. And again, this is something we take the participants through, that we are working with. The teachers read and the coaches read side by side, and we each pick things that stick with us and we talk about it and share it. So like we're going to live that right now. I'm going to give you, I'm trying to think if we're okay on time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. You might not get through the whole article, and that is okay. We're going to invite you again to look for 2 golden lines that hit any of those marks that I just talked about. While you're reading, I'm going to have you go ahead and turn your cameras off. We're not going to go into breakout rooms. I believe we're going to share in the chat when we're done some of the noticings that we had are our golden line, or we might just talk about it depending on time. Have a few people unmute. But what questions might you have?
So I'm sorry, we're doing one or all?
You get to pick one of your choice.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you for clarifying that.
And you're wanting us to put this on like physical post-it notes, correct?
Or jot it down on a notebook paper. Yep.
Okay.
That's going to capture your thinking. Yep. Thank you. I'm going to give
there
you
was one more question. How much time?
I think I'm looking at our time. I think I'm just going to do 5 minutes to read. So however far you get, it's okay. So we'll go until 11:55 for the reading part. Okay, whenever you're ready, feel free to shut your cameras off and open up one of those articles. Okay, and wherever you're at, I'm going to invite you to finish the sentence that you're on. And if you're jotting a sentence, finish that phrase. Just due to time, I'm not going to have us do a huge share out, but I am going to ask a quick question. And as you come back, feel free to turn your cameras back on. So I just know that you're there and ready to participate if you're able. I'm just going to ask if anyone read the text sets article, if they would be willing to unmute and share a golden line from that one.
I read that one.
Thank you, Stephanie.
If you're in that document, my golden line is from the second page 3, I think. Second column, the right-hand column. And this one both like was a confirmation. This quote was both a confirmation and like a nudge of like being mindful of this. So it says, in a sense, the text and materials talk to one another so that in reading the set, students build a coherent body of knowledge around a topic. So just really being focused when we're creating those text sets to make sure we have that anchor text, and then we're not just pulling 4 or 5 books that have to do with bumblebees, but really digging in and making sure it has the same vocabulary and same focus. I just really like that one.
Stephanie, that is my line too. Like just that verbiage or just visual of the books talking to each other and lifting ideas from each other and really supporting the work around the science thinking. I see another one in the chat from Lene. Vocabulary instruction should follow and be anchored in concrete science experiences whenever possible. I'll give one more option if anyone would like to share their golden line. I'm very open to having you just unmute and share. We'll take one more if someone would like to. It can be around text sets or a different one.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Stephanie just shared and just say that like one of my favorite kindergarten teachers used to say, don't steal someone's aha. And she used to say that to her students. And I feel like the same thing goes for the text sets when it comes to science. Like, don't let the text steal the students' aha. So like to what Stephanie just said about like, we're just going to grab a bunch of books about frogs or bumblebees or life cycles or whatever. If we haven't uncovered that or figured that out yet, and the text reveals it, then it's sort of like we're creating, I don't know, we're like undoing like the opportunity for students or preventing the opportunity for students to like uncover that content themselves. And so I just made that connection to what Stephanie said in that wonderful kindergarten teacher I used to work with.
Yeah, so powerful. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Amy right now, and just want to reiterate, this is where the teachers have made a goal. They chose one of those literacy pathways to go into. We did some learning on it, and now we're bringing that science consultant back in to support some more work.
All right, so as we push into the final part of the Learning Together session 2, we shift our focus a little bit, and we're going to just talk through a little bit about the sequencing of the learning of the curriculum resource that your district or building is working with. And really, this is all about how does the learning unfold in that curricular resource? You know, where are the intersects that make sense between science and literacy? And we have a sequencing document that is in your participant agenda, but we'll show that to you in just a moment. And it really guides the discussion as you move, you know, lesson by lesson to where to lift that those literacy focus areas that you've chosen. Just a couple of lessons learned. They're not going to get through the sequencing in the short time that you have with them. It's just barely enough time to get into it. But that's not important. It's really actually a nice access point, I think, for coaches to go back and work with the teachers on that after the Learning Together session. You may need to do a little bit of work prior to the second Learning Together session. The coaches and the teachers might need to dig into that resource a little bit. I know with our particular group, the first time, this was 2 years ago, the teachers hadn't even been trained in the curricular resource that they were using, the unit that they were going to be teaching in. And so to ask them to do any sequencing was, you know, an impossible task. So we had to separate those two. I think also one of the things that we've learned is that coaches quite often tell us that they feel uncomfortable because they don't know the science curriculum well enough to lead this kind of a conversation or planning. And we just try to assure them it's a co-learning opportunity. You don't have to be an expert in science. You don't have to know the curriculum really that well. I think it's just a matter of taking the opportunity to have some of those conversations and kind of learn about those together. We do also have a list of science contacts because some of you, and we've heard from a lot of people that they don't necessarily have a science person, but maybe you just don't know who that person is, or maybe there's a person in a neighboring ISD that you might be able to tap into. But we did get this list of Michigan Regional Points of Science contacts from Leanne Weber, who is the MDE science consultant. So that might be a resource that you could lean into as well. And certainly you can reach out to Wendi or Kari, who will be joining us, I think, here later today, or myself, if you're looking for some, you know, some support around science. Let's see. The last thing I wanted to mention as far as lessons that we've kind of learned is that some of the higher quality resources, curricular resources, tend to have natural connections already built in. Like there's sometimes some great places for academic productive talk or science talk, and they're built right into the resource. Some of them have some literacy connections. They have some actual text that you can use. And what I have found, at least in working with teachers, is they don't pay attention to those pieces. They don't tend to know how to use them because they haven't had the opportunity to really dig into them. You know, they're just concerned with implementing the science, and, you know, so those pieces can be missed. And I think as a literacy coach, especially, if you could kind of lift some of those places, that would be really helpful for them. And then finally, we have some examples, and we're going to give you a few moments, maybe about 4 or 5 minutes here, to just take a look at maybe 1 or 2 of the examples. The links are being put into the chat, and they're also on your participant agenda. So you can go back and look at the other ones that you don't get to today if you're interested. One of them, at least one of them, is a little bit different and did not use the sequencing template that we used, and that's okay. And I know that a lot of folks, if you're face-to-face, you might now want to use the digital formatting of it. You could just use sticky notes and kind of chart how these intersects are occurring, like on a board or wherever space you have. So whatever tools you want to use. The questions that we're kind of want you to think about as you look at these samples would be maybe what do you notice and what are you wondering? But also, how might you adapt this process to fit your needs? How might you think about using this work with the resource that you might be working with? So those would be the questions. I think we're going to just have you shut your cameras off. We'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes, or when you're ready to come back, let's do that. How about 12:09? Have you come back? If you're done sooner than that, then come on back and by turning your cameras on, and then we'll wrap up for lunch. What questions might you have? Is there anybody having any trouble with access to any of the documents? Everybody good? Okay, we'll see you at 12:09. Okay, I'm going to welcome everybody to come back. And I feel like just by looking at faces, I can almost hear tummies grumbling. So I don't want to delay lunch too much longer, but I did want to give you a chance to share any noticings or wonderings, or maybe some of the adaptations that you might have, or any questions that you might have at this point.
I think the tool looks super helpful. As a teacher who maybe would be uncomfortable with science, I feel like it would be a really great way for them to kind of see where they're going. My wondering is, if you're working with teachers who don't have, like, it almost looks like a curriculum map, right? Of like all of their lessons mapped out for the year. Like, is that the egg that needs to become before the chicken, or the chicken before the egg, or do you just tackle it all at once?
Sarah, what a great point. And I have to be honest, the mystery science, the 5th grade one, that comes from our area. And I actually went in because I wasn't as familiar with the resource as I wanted to be. So I went back in and I tried to fill in some of those, like the first lesson around what they were learning and what were the driving questions, just as a starting point to get us started with our discussion, because the teachers didn't even know where to really find those things. And so our first part of the discussion was really, where are those? Because there is a scope and sequence, where you can pull some of those things out. But so, it was a little bit of scaffolding, but I think it's worth the time. And teachers have told us that it's really powerful because they didn't really think about their curriculum resource in that way before. They just sort of dove in and just started teaching it. So this slowed them down and kind of got them into that. So thank you for sharing that. And Wendy's reminding me, we do have a readiness document that has some of those questions, that will address some of those questions, Sarah. And we will share that towards the end of the day, and that might help lead some of those conversations as well. All right, anything else? Okay, wonderful. All right, enjoy your lunch. We're going to ask you to come back at 12:45. Okay. Enjoy your lunch.
So you've gone through coaches onboarding session, learning set 1 where we forwarded science, learning set 2 where we dug into the literacy articles and looked at how you could map out resource for literacy, sort of a literacy map within the storyline of a science unit. And now we're going to pass it to our Muskegon friends to walk into learning session 3 and share how we kind of wrap up our learning together sessions in our SLIC model. Jackie and Kari. And by the way, Kari is now here. She had a district to go to this morning, so she's our Mesquite and ISD science consultant. So welcome, Kari.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Wendy, if you could put up the slideshow, that would be great. So our last learning session together, it was still a hybrid model. So we met locally with our districts, and then we Zoomed across the counties. And it was really just a time to celebrate the work that has been happening. We really wanted to reflect and learn from what we've experienced, right? And so we started, if you wanted to go to the next slide, the sequence of that night was we started with having participants do an individual reflection through a Google survey. And then we moved into this PQP protocol, which stands for praise, question, and polish. So we put participants across the counties in like groups for conversation. So we put them in teacher groups, all the teachers got together, and then all the coaches got together. And they went through and discussed what did they praise about this project? What were some questions they still had lingering? And what did they need to polish up? And lastly, which was my favorite part, we had them create a story of this journey. So they used the same protocol, praise, question, polish, to create that. And we have that to share with you today. So, okay, so to kick it off, every event, we always had an opener. And this opener for this activity was we had everyone just quick search for a science joke and put it in the chat. So I did that for you to kick us off with a little fun. So where do astronauts like to party? The space bar. I don't know why, but that one took me a minute. And then the next one is, did you hear about the new restaurant on the moon? The food is great, but there is no atmosphere. So we just thought that would be a fun way to get started. All right, next slide, please. So then we went into the individual reflection, and here's an example of just the survey that they worked on individually. And then if you click the next slide, you will see the results from that survey. So at the bottom, you can see the academic productive talk, the writing, and then the overall. I am just going to stop talking for a minute and give you just about a minute to look at that, and then we will move along. So we were really excited that the participants saw the value of this project and that they were able to transfer it. It's just, it was a really good reflection piece that this work is making a difference and people are finding it beneficial. And we're excited for the next step in this next year to gather even more data. All right, next slide, please. So what we thought we would do is we would put you one last time, I think it's one last time, in breakout rooms and go through this yourself. Now, actually, let me ask my team. Kari, were we going to put them in breakout rooms for this, or are we just having them do this individually?
I think we can just all hop on to the Jamboard all at once. Yeah.
Couldn't remember. I know we talked about both. So we won't put you in a Jamboard or in a breakout room, but we will have you reflect on the Jamboard. So this is the Jamboard that we did early on. I think it's in the chat. If not, we can get it in there. I'll put it in there. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Christy. So slide 3, if you want to take a peek at that. We really want you to reflect on today's learning. So what went well for you in your learning today? Like what was an aha that you want to praise? Slide 4 is the question. What lingering questions do you have about today's learning? And the last one is polish. What might you need to polish in order to move this work forward? So what is that, like that hindering moment for you or that hindering thing for you that you want to be aware of moving forward? So let's just give about 5 minutes or so. We'll check in and see how the board is populating. If you want to just go through that, you could turn off your cameras if you'd like, and come back in about 5 minutes for that. Right, it looks like the Jamboard is starting to slow down. I'm looking at the question, and one of the questions that really caught my attention is, where's the best place to start? It's always so hard, right? Like, it's always so hard to know when, and let's be real, not all the pieces are always going to be in place. So sometimes it's just, you find a small group of people willing to try the work and you dig in. This is our 3rd year. We started very small, which Kari will talk about later. We started very small and we learned and we tweaked and we continue to learn and tweak along the way. So I encourage you to take this work and just grab it by the horns and just try it. I think the other thing is some of the polish sticky notes are talking about knowing the science standards. And as literacy coaches, we came in not knowing the science and engineering practices. It's a journey, but it's one that if you walk alongside with someone, it'll be so much easier for you. And I know from personal experience as a literacy coach that it's a great entry point to work with teachers who are also feeling that way, right? Like, they don't always know the science and engineering practices. So coming alongside them and being learners with them is a great way to connect. All right, so this next portion is the example of the stories that the teachers and coaches created to tell their journey. So hopefully you'll be able to hear it okay. And Wendi, will you go ahead and press play on that? You may have noticed in that presentation that there were trade-offs. I forgot to mention that, but I do want to talk about that because we asked the teachers and coaches to really think about what they might have set aside or had to put away or change or give up, whatever word you may want to use. What was a trade-off to doing this work? And, some teachers talked about planning time. They had to use their planning time more effectively to set up that science. I know the teachers I worked with, that was a trade-off for them. But when reflecting, they all said it was worth it. And so that's the exciting thing, that it was worth the time and the investment, because kids love science and they learn, and the quality of conversations were so great. So I just wanted to name that. All right, Kari is here and she is going to take us into the next few slides before we end our day.
Thanks, Jackie. Hi, everybody. I'm Kari Parnin. Sorry I missed the morning, but I'll just add on to Jackie just said about how there's trade-offs, and you can even see that in their reflection of their story, they still had questions, right? Those lingering questions, and those are absolutely okay, because when we finish, a year-long project, those questions is what helps lead us to the next year, right? So that hopefully they can spend some time exploring what are some possible strategies to address those questions that they had. But I think my favorite part about those stories is seeing all the student work that they put in and that they're willing to share. And you can just see how much pride they have in their students in sharing those pieces of evidence that kids were doing science. So I just thought I'd add that because I just love that part of the last Learning Together session. The other piece too, as facilitators of this work, we are also reflecting in that Learning Together session 3. When they give us that Google form in the very beginning for their individual reflection, that data is analyzed, as you could see from Jackie's graph that she showed you. So we would take a look at that data to help move us forward. But then also this graph right here just kind of speaks to some of your questions and thoughts about, how to grow this work. And as you can see, in the first year, compared to where we are now in year 3, how much our interest and commitment for teachers and coaches has grown, right? So year 3, we're about to start with them. And I said that those numbers are subject to change because they might get bigger. And so those are all rough numbers, but they, I think, are just a great representation of how this work has grown. Okay, if you go to the next slide. So what we're going to give you now is access to a document that has facilitator resources kind of from start to finish. If you click the next slide real quick, not next slide, but the animation, if you click again, not next, there we go. So if anybody is familiar with implementation science, I just want to name that, by giving you these resources, there's no expectation that you jump into the work tomorrow, right? So if we think about stages of implementation, that it's okay to spend a great deal of time in exploration, assessing needs, looking at context, looking at whether or not a certain innovation or initiative is a good fit for your district. And so starting small is okay. Even if you only have one shoulder partner to dig into this work with, either today or next week or next month, that spending that time just learning is really valuable. So in this, if you could either take a picture of the QR code, or I believe the resources will be put into the chat. It's basically a Google Doc that organizes all of our facilitator resources. And if it's not put in the chat, I can do that myself. But we're going to give you about 25 minutes just to dig into this. So open up the links. If there's anything that's not working, let us know. If there's any questions you have, also let us know. If you want to be put into a breakout room with your counterpart, if you came here today as a team, that's something we can do too. Just write it in the chat of who you want to be in a group with, and we can put you into a breakout group. If you are a literacy person who just wants a science help, we can make a great breakout group and one of us can step into that space. What questions do you have? You could type them in the chat or come off mute. So this is just a 25-minute time period for you to dig into these resources and take a look at what we have for you. Okay, great. So feel free to turn your camera off. We'll do 25 minutes to let you dig in. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. I was just talking about how, 25 minutes is not enough time to necessarily understand the entire process, understand all the resources, but hopefully you were able to see that for almost everything, there's a facilitator-facing document, a participant-facing document, and then a lot of the exploration pieces of sample emails that you could send to an administrator or have your literacy coach send to an administrator. We've all done it differently. I think everyone on the SLIC team has approached that moment of recruitment differently, right? Depending on the school, depending on the context, right? For example, I was able to talk to some teachers at my children's school, right? To kind of get my foot in there, where we might have someone who knows an administrator really well. So maybe they go to the administrator first. So it really just depends on your context of who's going to be the one talking to the teachers first, who's going to be the one talking to the administrators. And so But a lot of this work, we try to have it be accessible in multiple ways, right? So it's not just like a one size fits all model. I'd love to hear just like a one word thought or feeling in the chat about like how you feel now after looking through the facilitator resources. So if you could just take a moment and come up with one word to describe how you feel or what you're thinking after looking through the facilitator resources. We've got grateful, ready, amazing, appreciated and valued, excited, inspired, motivated, excellent. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if you didn't catch what Wendi wrote in the chat as well, that she recruited in the bathroom when she ran into a former STEM coach who is now an early literacy coach. So it can happen anywhere. There isn't like, you know, your people, you know, the context in which you work. And sometimes it just takes a random run-in with someone. I ran into a teacher at a park and started talking about the work that I do. And she was really, she's not going to join us this year, but you know, it was just a random moment where I was able to run into her and give her some ideas about what we do with Slick. So yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. What I want to have everybody do now actually is head back to our Jamboard. And if you could go to, so I just put it in the chat, you probably already still had it open. If we can look at our first set of stickies on slide 1. So what are you hoping for today? Just take a minute and either read someone else's or find yours. And if you could do like a star or a check mark or a smiley, anything to represent that maybe we did kind of lean into the thing that you were hoping for today. So again, in Jamboard, go to either your sticky that you wrote or maybe someone else's and let us know if, oh, I see a check. Look at those. I always do the hand-drawn check that is really messy. So I appreciate someone making a bunch of beautiful green check marks. Thank you. And the check doesn't have to represent that we fully met the thing you were hoping for. It can be, we leaned into it a little bit. Feel free to also just take a green sticky that someone copy and pasted over there. Thank you for whoever did that. I see a lot of check marks on the green sticky that says build a foundation for helping teachers integrate science and literacy to the betterment of both. I think that's a great representation of what we were hoping for today as well, to help you build that foundation. I see several people saying that we found some ways to connect science and literacy. I think that's great. Hopefully that learning together session 1 and 2 were really valuable. And that's exactly what we're doing in the model, right? We help build that foundation. We help connect things. It's not something that everyone has to step into the space being an expert on, which I think is also a really good model of helping teachers see that they can do science in the K-5 classroom, that they don't have to have all the answers. I know that that is sometimes the apprehension of attempting science every single day, K-5, that, well, I don't know anything about volcanoes or things like that. You don't have to know all the answers. So really great. Okay, great. If we could go back to the slides. We're nearing the end. We wanted to give you some time on your own to kind of, you know, process the day and maybe start thinking of an action plan and what you're going to do. So this is the slide. Perfect. So some next steps, if you're interested, we do have our learning together sessions with our current cohort starting next week. So October 24th. If you want to shadow that and just kind of watch how it is done, and it would just be shadowing. We wouldn't like ask you to introduce yourself. It would be completely, you know, camera off and muted, and you're just watching to see how we run it. Because I'm sure it was mentioned earlier that it is a hybrid model where, you know, Jackie and I will be here in Muskegon with our people in person, but we're all together with all the other ISDs and RESAs. And the way that you would get access to that learning together session, in a minute, we'll send you to a survey. And in the survey, you would indicate like, yes, send me the Zoom link. I'd like to come and watch and shadow. So we've got 3 dates there for you to join us if you want to. And then we're also going to do this session again on April 9th. I think we're hoping to do it in person, but it will be, the same format as today. And we'll obviously take your feedback as well. So that will be in the survey. If there's anything that you felt you needed more time processing, or, if there's a glow and a grow that you could give us, that would be great. And then if we could go to the next slide. So here is where we'd love to hear your feedback. If you could fill out that Google form. That's also, like I said, where you're going to indicate if you want to join us and be a shadow for our learning together sessions. And so you can either fill it out using that, or Christy just put it in the chat as well if you'd like to use your computer. Filling it out now. I know that if I get asked to fill out a survey and I don't do it right away, I forget. So we'll give you some time to reflect and fill out the survey. Okay, so hopefully that was enough time to fill out the survey. If not, what I'm just gonna have everybody do, we've got 20 minutes till 2 o'clock. I'm gonna give you some time to think about what are your next personal steps. I know we've shared some next steps of, hey, you could come to our learning together sessions, but, I see from your 1-word descriptions of the day, motivated, inspired, excited. I feel like a lot of you have some next steps that you know about, that you've kind of already are getting excited and thinking about. So if you feel comfortable, could you just share what your next steps are? Because maybe there's someone who's, their brain is a tornado right now and they're just not sure what their next step is. And so maybe your next step can help give them some footing. So just go ahead in the chat if you're willing to share what are your next steps personally or professionally in this work. I like that idea, just sharing out, right? So kind of just having those conversations, get things moving. Yeah, I like that idea, Sarah. So finding a small number of people to engage in the work, build from there, treat it like a pilot. Absolutely. Oh, I like that idea, Stephanie. Getting your hands on the science curriculum, become more familiar. That's a great idea. I love Kate. You already emailed the coordinator and district curriculum director to talk about this work. I love that. It's great to just go, right? Get things started. Begin conversations. Good. Learn more about, I love that, right? We're all in a learning space, right? Learn more about what they're doing with science already. Wonderful. Meet with building principals, create a plan, utilize your science consultant. Absolutely. I think I missed some up top. Meet with literacy coach consultants. Wonderful. Awesome. I'm actually gonna, I think, take a picture of this chat and we'll add that to the participant agenda for today. I love this.
We'll have it downloaded too because we're recording.
Oh, perfect. Good. Okay, so with that said,
I actually have a question, if you don't mind.
Hi, Sarah.
So I am a science person, but not a literacy person. And I'm sure you have it somewhere in all of the resources. But is the best place to go for like firming up my literacy content knowledge, the essential practices, or are there other resources that would be as or more helpful?
Literacy person, you want to answer this question? That's a great question.
I can speak to that. We really did a lot of work with the essential instructional practices, but when I was coaching with the teachers, we would then, based on their goal, we would dig into the standards a little bit. So we made those connections with the practices, and then we dug in when we had our goal, we dug into the standards on that specific goal.
Thank you, Jackie.
I think somewhere in the resource documents are links to the literacy essentials. There's a whole bunch built out on, I believe it's on virtual learning. Where is the platform, Cindy? Jackie, I know Christy's having trouble coughing, so I
got
don't
it
want
now.
to like call on her. Are you good now? Yeah, at the literacyessentials.org, and you can actually do some of their modules. You don't have to do them all, but maybe some of the modules are helpful. I got most of my learning, to be honest, from the 3 amazing literacy coaches I've been working with on this project for the last 3 years, but I have been known to dig into a module or 2.
And Sarah too, Jackie, Cindy, and I are always open to conversations with you as well. So feel free to just chat with one of us and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about in science. What do the literacy essentials say about that? Or, what is the literacy foundation for that? And we would be happy to chat with you. We can also kind of dig into our early literacy coaches network to see who else might be in your area that could walk alongside of you as well. So I'll put the link to the essentials modules in the chat so that they're easy for you to get to.
Thank you.
There might also be an opportunity for the science folks and their groups that we come together around to do some learning together as a group around the literacy essentials. Emsella, perhaps Wendi, MySci PLN. I don't know if you're a part of those, Sarah. I think you are, but maybe that's a topic that we could explore as a group of science consultants across the state.
It's a great idea. We can open it up to any other questions. Sarah, thank you for that question, because I can see lots of heads nodding that that's a space that other people are thinking about too. So just like how we encourage students to ask questions because they may help their peers learn, this could be a similar space. So we don't have anything else planned for the rest of today because we wanted to leave this open where you can stay on and ask us questions, or if you want to just individually process and plan, you don't have to stay on, but we'll just open up that time for you now. I'll stay on until 2 o'clock, but if there are any questions for the whole group, feel free to unmute and let us know or put it in the chat. Thank you so much for coming, everybody.